When 11-year-old Dustin stumbles onto the front porch of the McAllister's house with nothing but a backpack and a fragile sense of hope, he has no idea that a single glance through a window will hint at a mystery bigger than he's ever faced. Before we dive into what lurks behind those curtains and the secrets one family is desperate to keep, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in the power of courage, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Dustin has dragged his feet all the way down the block, barely listening to the social worker who's escorted him here. She's the third one he's had in the last 18 months, though he's long ago lost count of all the foster homes. The drone of the car's engine, the scrape of his shoes on the pavement, it all merges into one tired memory he fears will repeat forever. He's not new to the system. Some kids can measure their growth in pencil marks on a bedroom wall. Dustin measures his in the number of times he stuffed clothes into a garbage bag, moving on to the next place that might not want him. Yet there's a strange flicker of optimism this time. The McAllisters are rumored to be stable, warm, a real family, as the social worker calls them. Standing on the porch, Dustin clutches his backpack straps. The house itself is tidy, freshly painted shutters, a neatly trimmed hedge. The smell of somebody's dinner drifts from an open kitchen window. Before the social worker can knock, the door swings open. Patricia McAllister appears, wearing a broad smile and an apron dusted with flour. She's maybe in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a voice that glides over Dustin like a comforting blanket. "You must be Dustin," she says. "Come in, honey. I've made chocolate chip cookies." A wave of heat washes over him as he steps inside, partly from the warmth of the house, partly from nerves. His cheeks redden. Homes with that fresh-baked cookie smell used to exist only in his daydreams. He glances around at the living room, plush couches, shelves stacked with neatly arranged books, an inviting fireplace with a few family photos perched on the mantel. Already, this house has a soul, unlike some of the colder, emptier placements he remembers. He exhales, thinking maybe this time it will be different. Greg McAllister emerges from another room. He's tall and broad-shouldered, with a posture that suggests he's used to being in control. His handshake is firm but not painful. "We're glad you're here, Dustin," he says, though his voice is more reserved than Patricia's. "Set your things down, get comfortable." Dustin nods. "Thank you," he mumbles. He can't decide if Greg's seriousness is just normal or something else. Then, from behind Greg, a boy peeks out. Dustin guesses the boy is around his age, maybe a little older. He's scrawny, pale, with dark hair that hangs over his forehead. He stares at Dustin with a kind of guarded curiosity, like he can't decide if Dustin is friend or foe. Patricia gestures. "This is Kyle, our son. He's 12. Just a year older than you. Why don't you two go to the kitchen and grab some cookies while I finish chatting with Mrs. Warner?" She nods at the social worker, who's carrying paperwork. Kyle steps aside, and Dustin follows him down a narrow hallway. The air smells of cookie dough and a faint trace of lemon cleaning product. Dustin notices how Kyle walks, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze often dropping to the floor. He leads Dustin to a bright, yellow-painted kitchen. On the table is a platter of cookies that look like they belong on a magazine cover, crisp around the edges, gooey in the middle. Dustin's stomach growls, betraying him. He can't remember the last time he ate something homemade that wasn't from a box. He reaches for a cookie. "Thanks," he says, forcing a small smile toward Kyle. Kyle watches him carefully. "Mom said you're new," he says softly, "that you might stay here for a while." There's a note of hesitation in his tone, as though he's not quite sure whether to welcome Dustin or keep him at arm's length. Dustin takes a bite of cookie. It's so good he almost forgets to chew. "Yeah," he manages. "I've been bouncing around." An awkward silence settles between them. Dustin can't help noticing a faint bruise on Kyle's forearm when he pushes his sleeves up. It's bluish-purple, shaped in a half-moon, like someone's grip might have caused it. The boy quickly tugs his sleeve back down as though he's caught Dustin's stare. "Soccer practice," Kyle says, a little too fast. Dustin nods, not wanting to pry. He's lived with a half-dozen kids in different homes, and bruises aren't rare. But something about Kyle's quick explanation sets Dustin's nerves on edge. He tries to shrug off the feeling. After all, it could be any number of innocent reasons. The next hour is a blur of forms and polite conversation. Dustin is introduced to the layout of the home. Patricia guides him up the stairs to a small bedroom freshly decorated with bright curtains and a cartoon character bedspread that's maybe a bit young for an 11-year-old, but it's cozy. The closet is empty except for a few hangers. Dustin sets his backpack on the bed, a surreal sense of belonging washing over him that he's too cynical to trust fully. He meets Greg again in the hallway, who tells him dinner will be at 6 sharp. "We expect everyone at the table on time," Greg says, more a command than a request. Dustin senses that discipline here might be strict. Is that good, or does it hide something else? When dinner arrives, Patricia has prepared roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. It's a feast compared to the microwave dinners Dustin's eaten in many other homes. They all take seats, Greg at the head, Patricia to his right, Kyle next to her, and Dustin across from Kyle. The conversation is benign. School talk, the weather, a mention of church activities. Kyle barely speaks unless asked a direct question. Dustin notices how Kyle flinches if Greg's tone sharpens, even a little. But it could be just nerves. Dustin tries not to read too much into it. Later that evening, Dustin heads to his room to unpack his meager belongings. He drapes a few shirts in the closet, sets a worn paperback on the nightstand. In the hallway, he hears murmured voices, Patricia's gentle laugh, Greg's low rumble, but can't make out the words. Eventually, exhaustion claims him. The next morning, Dustin awakens to sunlight streaming through the curtains. He smells bacon from downstairs. He can't remember the last time he woke up to a real breakfast. He goes down to find Patricia humming by the stove and Greg reading a newspaper. Kyle is already seated, nibbling toast. Dustin slides into the chair beside him. There's a plate for Dustin piled with bacon, scrambled eggs, and fruit. It feels borderline overwhelming. "Eat up," Patricia says, placing a glass of orange juice before him. "You've got to keep your energy for your first day at the new school." Dustin thanks her, but his stomach twists with anxiety. New schools mean new faces, new challenges. Yet maybe this time, with a stable family, things will go better. He devours the bacon, feeling a bit of hope creep in. Greg folds his newspaper. "I'll drop Kyle off first, then we'll swing by your middle school," he says. "Try to make a good impression." Dustin nods, stuffing the last bit of egg into his mouth. He notices Kyle's eyes flick nervously between Greg and Dustin, as if uncertain about how Dustin will react to Greg's commanding style. Dustin shrugs it off. He's been in plenty of homes where the dad figure tries to establish authority. Maybe that's all it is. The drive is quiet except for the hum of the engine. Greg seldom speaks. Kyle sits pressed against the door, his backpack on his lap. Dustin tries small talk. "So how's your school? Is it big?" But Kyle only shrugs. He stares out the window at the passing sidewalks and rows of houses. Dustin can't read him at all. They drop Kyle off in front of a modest building labeled Westbrook Middle School. Kyle slips out without a word, glancing back at Dustin for just a second, a flicker of something in his expression, sadness or warning. Then Greg pulls away. Another 5 minutes, and Dustin's at North Pine Middle School, a slightly larger campus. Greg barely slows the car. "See you at 3, he calls as Dustin hurriedly steps out onto the sidewalk. Navigating the new school is disorienting, strange hallways, teachers who don't know him, kids who stare. Dustin plasters on a polite smile and tries to follow the schedule Patricia wrote out for him. He attends classes, meets a few friendly faces, but mostly he keeps to himself. He's learned it's safer not to open up too quickly. Still, the day passes without major drama, and at 3 o'clock, Greg is indeed waiting in the same spot. They pick up Kyle at Westbrook. Dustin notices Kyle stands outside the school alone, separate from other kids. Greg doesn't ask Kyle about his day. He just gestures for Kyle to get in. That night, Dustin finishes homework at the kitchen table while Patricia prepares spaghetti. Kyle sits across from him, scribbling in a notebook. Dustin glances up. "Can I borrow a pencil?" Kyle slides one over without looking up. Dustin spots bruises again when Kyle adjusts his sleeve. Now they look fresher, more distinct finger marks. Dustin's breath hitches. "You sure you're all right?" he asks in a low voice. Kyle stiffens, eyes darting to the doorway as if expecting Greg to appear. "I told you I'm fine," he mutters, pulling his sleeve down. Dustin doesn't push it. He remembers how homes can be. But a feeling of unease coils in his gut. He tries to focus on his math homework. Dinner is pleasant enough. Spaghetti, garlic bread, Kyle quietly nibbling, Greg discussing some church fundraiser with Patricia. The tension remains an undercurrent no one acknowledges. Over the next few days, Dustin notices subtle patterns. Kyle jumps to his feet whenever Greg says, "Kyle, do this. Kyle, get that." If Greg even hints at annoyance, Kyle seems to shrink. Patricia, for her part, fusses over Dustin's lunches and offers to drive him to the library if he needs to research anything for school. She's sweet, motherly, but Dustin wonders why she doesn't pick up on Kyle's nerves. Maybe she does and chooses not to see it. One afternoon, Patricia leaves on a weekend church retreat. She kisses Kyle's forehead, gives Dustin a quick hug, and tells Greg she'll be back Monday morning. As soon as she's gone, Greg's demeanor shifts. He becomes more impatient, snapping at the boys for minor things. The house feels heavier. Kyle grows even more withdrawn. Dustin tries to crack jokes, lighten the mood. It doesn't help. That Sunday, Greg calls out from the living room, "Boys, get in the car. We're going for a drive." Dustin glances at Kyle, who's sitting cross-legged on the floor, doodling in a sketchbook. Kyle tenses. "Where to?" he asks quietly. Greg's voice is flinty. "Father-son bonding," he says. Dustin doubts it. He climbs into the back seat with Kyle while Greg steers them across town. The neighborhoods get older, more rundown. Finally, they pull up to a dimly lit garage in a battered industrial park. The sign above the door is half missing. Greg parks, gets out without explanation. He opens the trunk, pulls out a sealed cardboard box. "Kyle, come help," he orders. Kyle shoots Dustin a fearful glance. Dustin feels his gut twist. He stays in the car while Kyle trudges after Greg. Through the windshield, Dustin sees Greg open a side door, disappearing inside. Then two men appear, tough-looking guys, one with a tattoo creeping up his neck. There's an envelope exchange, cash, presumably. Dustin's chest tightens. This is not normal. A few minutes later, Kyle returns, eyes wide. He slides into the back seat. Dustin waits for Greg to be out of earshot. "What was that about?" he whispers. Kyle's face is pale. "You didn't see anything," he says, voice trembling. "Please just forget it. Promise me." Dustin swallows. He nods, but his mind whirls. He's no stranger to shady dealings. In previous foster homes, he's overheard stories. This looks suspiciously like stolen goods or illegal trades. The suspicion lodges in Dustin's chest like a thorn. Greg emerges, tosses an envelope into the glove compartment, and drives off in grim silence. That night, Dustin can barely sleep. He replays the scene in his head. The next morning, Monday, Patricia returns, cheerful and oblivious. She never asks about the weekend. She does notice Dustin's subdued mood, though, and tries to coax him into a conversation. "Are you settling in okay?" she asks after dinner, offering him a slice of pie. Dustin nods but keeps quiet about the garage trip. He can't figure out who to trust. He's been in enough homes to know that telling the wrong person can blow everything up. Days pass. Dustin spots Greg bringing home new gadgets, expensive watches, a few boxes he stashes in the locked garage. Patricia coos over the brand new coffee machine or the designer handbag he claims he got for a bargain. Meanwhile, Kyle's bruises never seem to fade. Late one night, Dustin wakes to the sound of low voices echoing in the hallway. Heart pounding, he creeps toward his door. Through a crack, he sees Greg gripping Kyle by the arm, voice menacing. "Don't forget who puts food on the table," Greg growls. "One word, you'll regret it." Kyle nods meekly, tears shining. Dustin feels sick. This is worse than he feared. He steps back into his room, quietly closes the door. He sits on the edge of his bed, hands shaking. Does he call child services? The memory of being yanked from a dozen homes and labeled a troublemaker, a liar, surfaces in his mind. He recalls social workers who said they couldn't verify his claims of mistreatment in a past placement. He's only been here a short time. No one will trust his word over Greg's. And Greg is large, commanding. The fear keeps Dustin silent. The next morning at breakfast, Greg acts civil, offering Dustin a ride to school. Kyle's eyes are puffy, as if he didn't sleep. Patricia chatters about a recipe she wants to try. They all pretend everything is normal. Dustin realizes Kyle's living in a constant state of terror. He also sees that Patricia either willfully ignores the signs or is too afraid to confront them. When Greg leaves for work, Dustin and Kyle are briefly alone in the house. Dustin musters courage. "Kyle, you can't keep doing this," he says quietly. "He's hurting you. You have bruises." Kyle exhales, hugging his arms around himself. "I'm used to it," he whispers. I don't want him to hurt you too. If you say something, he might snap." Dustin's stomach twists. "But we can't let him get away with it. He's doing illegal stuff too, right?" Kyle nods slowly, tears forming. "Yeah. He trades stolen things. He says it's how he keeps us fed. He said if I open my mouth, we'll both be in big trouble." He swipes at his cheek, blinking back tears. "I tried to tell Mom once. She just told me to keep my head down. She said we'd lose everything if Dad went to jail." Anger flares in Dustin's chest, mixing with a sense of helplessness. "I can't just watch him hurt you," he says, voice trembling. Kyle steps closer, voice urgent. "Please don't talk to anyone. He'll find out. He always does. And he has a temper." Their eyes meet. Dustin senses Kyle's desperation. He nods reluctantly, feeling guilt pressed down on him like a weight. But how can he stand by? After Kyle leaves for school, Dustin trudges through his own classes, distracted. He stares at the counselor's office door, heart pounding, but fear holds him back. He imagines Greg's rage, or child services whisking him away. Maybe they'll separate him and Kyle will be left alone with that man. The thought is unbearable. A week goes by in a tense stalemate. Greg's business dealings continue, and Kyle's bruises multiply. Dustin tries to remain inconspicuous. Patricia flutters around, oblivious or in denial. Dustin wonders how someone so warm can ignore a child's pain. Then one afternoon, everything escalates. It starts with a simple accident. Kyle spills a glass of juice on the dining table. Greg erupts, eyes blazing. "Can't you do anything right?" he shouts, grabbing Kyle's wrist. Kyle yelps, face contorting in pain. Patricia stands by, tears in her eyes, muttering, "Stop, please," but making no move to intervene. Dustin's heart slams against his ribs. He leaps from his chair. "It's my fault," he blurts, trying to shield Kyle. "I knocked the glass." Greg turns on Dustin, releasing Kyle only to jab a finger in Dustin's face. "Don't lie to me," he snarls. "I saw him drop it." Dustin's mouth goes dry. He tries to speak, but Greg's rage is palpable. Greg sneers. "You know what, boy? Don't get any ideas. I can send you back to the system with one phone call. You're not my kid." Trembling, Dustin steps back, wishing he were braver. Greg throws a dish towel onto the table and stomps away. The silence that follows is suffocating. Kyle crumples onto a chair, cradling his wrist. Patricia rushes to Kyle's side, tears slipping down her cheeks, but her apologies are weak. "I'm sorry," she whispers. "We just can't upset him. This Complicated? Dustin's eyes burn with tears too, anger roiling. This is not just a difficult father. This is abuse, plain and simple. That night, Dustin can't sleep. He lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. He replays Greg's threats, Kyle's terrified face, the brandished stolen goods. Something must be done, no matter the risk. He picks up his phone, an older model given to him by a previous foster parent, and scrolls through the contact list. There it is, the number for the school counselor, Ms. Woodruff. She told him he could call if he ever needed help or had questions. He hesitates, imagining Greg discovering this. But the memory of Kyle's bruises steals him. Dustin slips out of bed, creeping down the hall to the garage door. With trembling fingers, he flips on a small light. The garage is chilly, filled with the hush of night. He finds the locked storage area behind some shelves. He's seen Greg enter the code on a keypad. Dustin tries a few combinations, Greg's birthday, some random guesses, and finally, in desperation, tries Patricia's birthday. The keypad beeps green. The latch clicks open. Inside, boxes upon boxes of electronics, jewelry, brand new clothes with tags. It's definitely stolen merchandise. Dustin snaps pictures on his phone, capturing evidence. His hands shake so badly he almost drops it. He locks the storage area again, retraces his steps to his room without being heard. Back under his covers, heart hammering, he composes a text to Ms. Woodruff. I need help. My foster dad is hurting my foster brother. He's also dealing stolen stuff. My friend is in danger. I have proof. He attaches a couple of blurry photos. He hesitates a final moment, then hits send. He waits. The phone rests in his sweaty palms. A minute later, it buzzes. Ms. Woodruff's reply, call the police. This is serious. Are you safe? Dustin's eyes blur with tears. He can't call the police from the house phone, Greg might hear. He types back, I can't. I'm scared. He'll find out. Can you do it? Her response comes swiftly, yes. But keep your head down. Don't confront him. Stay safe. Dustin exhales shakily, relief and terror mingling. There's no going back now. He hides the phone under his pillow. Outside, the night is silent, as if holding its breath for the storm to come. Morning arrives too soon. Dustin stumbles to breakfast, heart thudding. Greg is there, scowling. Patricia tries to force a smile, offering Dustin pancakes. He notices Kyle's wrist is wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Boys, Greg says curtly, I have an errand to run later. You're coming? Dustin swallows. Could this be the day Ms. Woodruff sends the police? He glances at Kyle, who looks pale as a ghost. They drop Kyle at Westbrook Middle. Dustin endures his classes with a constant knot in his stomach. When the final bell rings, he finds Ms. Woodruff waiting near the entrance. She beckons him aside, face solemn. I've called the authorities, she whispers. They may be monitoring Greg. If you end up in a dangerous situation, text me, okay? Dustin's throat closes. He can only nod. She gently squeezes his shoulder. Your friend Kyle needs you. You're doing the right thing. Greg's car appears at the curb. Dustin climbs in, sees Kyle in the back seat. The tension is so thick he can taste it. Greg's knuckles are tight on the steering wheel. We're going on a little family outing, he says, forcing a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Kyle's fingers clamp around the seatbelt. Dustin, forcing composure, texts Ms. Woodruff under the seat. He's taking us somewhere now. He slips the phone back into his pocket. They drive across town, heading to that industrial park. Dustin wonders if the police will intercept them. His pulse thrums. Greg parks outside a weather-beaten warehouse. Out, he orders. Grab the boxes from the trunk. Dustin and Kyle exchange a fearful look, then do as told. The warehouse interior is dim, dusty. A few men lounge against a wall, smoking. They give the boys a cursory glance. Greg snaps his fingers at Dustin to move some crates. Dustin's phone vibrates, but he can't check it. He just hopes it's Ms. Woodruff or the police. After a tense minute, sirens echo in the distance, growing louder. Dustin's heart leaps. Greg stiffens, eyes flashing. Then multiple police cars skid to a stop outside, lights flashing against the grimy windows. Officers pour out, guns drawn. Through the open warehouse door, Dustin sees plainclothes detectives too. They're shouting for Greg to surrender. Greg panics. He lunges for Kyle, seizing him by the wrist, dragging him close as a human shield. "Stay back," he roars. The men who were smoking drop their cigarettes, putting their hands up. They want no part of a standoff. Dustin stands frozen, chest tight with terror, glancing wildly at the police, then at Kyle's pleading eyes. "Please," Dustin cries, stepping forward, voice trembling. "Let him go. You're caught. It's over." Greg's face is twisted with desperation. "You little brat," he hisses, eyes flicking to Dustin. "You did this." He tightens his grip on Kyle's arm. Kyle winces, tears sliding down his face. The police move in carefully. One officer shouts, "Drop any weapons, release the boy." Greg loosens his hold for just a fraction of a second, enough for Kyle to wrench free, stumbling toward Dustin. The officers surge forward, tackling Greg to the concrete floor. Shouts, scuffles, the sound of handcuffs clicking. Dustin grabs Kyle, arms around his trembling shoulders. Kyle buries his face in Dustin's shirt, sobbing. The stolen goods spill from the crates, a damning pile of evidence. Greg howls furious curses as he's hauled upright by the officers. It's chaos. Eventually, the police escort Dustin and Kyle outside. Ms. Woodruff is there, looking pale but determined. Paramedics check them for injuries. Kyle's wrist is bruised, possibly sprained. Dustin's knees feel like jelly. He can't stop shaking. At the station they give statements. Dustin tells them everything. How Greg threatened them, the stolen goods, the bruises. Kyle stammers through a tearful account of the abuse he's suffered for months. Patricia arrives later, in tears, telling the police how she was too afraid to intervene, how she knew Greg was involved in something illegal but didn't realize the extent. Dustin almost pities her, but a flicker of anger remains. She let Kyle suffer. Child Protective Services steps in. They declare that Dustin and Kyle can't remain with the McAllisters. Greg is charged with child abuse, assault, and dealing in stolen property. The next hours blur. Dustin is told he'll be placed temporarily elsewhere. Kyle, too, must go to a different home or maybe a group facility, pending an investigation. Dustin's heart clenches at the thought of them being separated. Despite the horrific circumstances, he's grown to care about Kyle, who feels almost like a younger brother. Ms. Woodruff finds them in a waiting area, both slumped on plastic chairs. Kyle's arm is in a sling, tears dried on his cheeks. Dustin stares at the floor, guilt and relief battling inside him. Ms. Woodruff kneels beside them. "You did something incredibly brave," she says softly. "I know it's scary, but you saved yourselves. No one else was going to." Kyle looks at her with haunted eyes. "What happens to us now?" he whispers. She gently strokes his hair. "You'll both be placed somewhere safe. We'll try our best to keep you updated on each other. And once the dust settles, maybe you can find a foster family that will take you in properly, or who knows, maybe you'll be adopted one day." She sees Dustin's doubtful expression and adds, "It's possible. Don't lose hope." A caseworker arrives, leads Kyle away. He glances back at Dustin, a silent plea in his eyes. Dustin steps forward, pulls him into a hug. "We'll keep in touch," Dustin promises, though he's not sure how. Kyle clings to him for a moment, then leaves. Dustin can't help a surge of sadness, like losing a sibling all over again. A part of him wonders if there was any way to avoid this outcome, if there was a reality where they could have stayed in that house but with Greg removed from the equation. It seems impossible. He's driven away by another social worker to a temporary group home, a small facility with bunk beds and a few other kids in limbo. The environment is sterile, the staff well-intentioned but overworked. Dustin tries to settle in, but his mind is stuck replaying the final confrontation, the feel of Kyle's trembling shoulders. Nights pass, slow and uneasy. He meets with Ms. Woodruff once for an update. Greg remains in custody. The stolen goods ring has deeper ties, so the police are investigating further. Patricia is cooperating but could also face charges for her complicity. Kyle, according to Ms. Woodruff, is staying with a different foster family. He's physically safe but emotionally raw. He's asked about Dustin. Ms. Woodruff suggests that maybe, once they're stable, they can arrange a visit. Dustin clings to that possibility like a lifeline. School becomes a blur again. Dustin returns to North Pine Middle, commuting from the group home. He can't concentrate, plagued by guilt that he blew up Kyle's life, though he knows logically it was Greg's fault. One evening, he's lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, when his phone buzzes. It's a text from Ms. Woodruff. Kyle is doing better. He wants me to tell you he's okay. Dustin exhales relief. He types back, "Tell him I'm sorry. I wish things were different." She replies, "He understands. He hopes you can see each other soon." The following weeks are a roller coaster. Dustin endures questions from investigators, more sessions with Ms. Woodruff. He meets a potential foster couple, but it doesn't work out. Every time a staff member at the group home calls his name, his heart leaps, hoping for news about Kyle or a new placement. He misses the sense of belonging, even if it was false, that he felt at the McAllisters for a few brief days. He wonders if Kyle feels the same. Finally, Ms. Woodruff arranges a supervised meeting at the community center. Dustin arrives early, scuffing his sneakers against the tile floor. Kyle walks in with a different social worker, wearing a subdued expression, but his face lights up when he sees Dustin. They cling to each other in a fierce hug, ignoring the staff's gentle cough. Kyle's wrist is healed except for some lingering tenderness. "How are you?" Dustin asks, eyes searching Kyle's face. Kyle shrugs. "I'm safe at least. The family I'm with, they're nice enough. But it's not home." His voice wavers. "I just wanted to say thanks. I know everything's messed up, but you saved me." Dustin's throat tightens. "I couldn't let him keep hurting you. I just wish, maybe it could have ended differently." They sit together on a plastic bench, the social workers a discreet distance away. Kyle tells Dustin that Greg will likely be convicted of multiple charges. Patricia is under investigation for enabling child abuse, though she might get some leniency if she testifies. Kyle's voice shakes when he mentions his mom. "I don't even know if I want to see her," he admits. "She let him do all that." Dustin wraps an arm around Kyle. "You have a right to be angry." "I'm sorry, man." The lump in his throat makes words come out shaky. "But you're free now. No more tiptoeing around him, no more bruises." A watery smile touches Kyle's lips. "I just hope we can keep in touch." He lowers his gaze. "You're like the only person who stood up for me." Dustin's eyes burn. "Yeah, we'll figure something out. Ms. Woodruff said maybe once everything's settled, we could be placed in the same home. She's not sure, but there's a chance." They talk for an hour, small mundane details and heavier confessions. By the end, Kyle is more relaxed, though sadness underlines every sentence. The social workers give them a gentle reminder that time is up. They hug once more. As Kyle walks away, he turns back, waves. Dustin waves back, heart aching with both sorrow and a flicker of hope. More weeks trudge on. Dustin's group home feels emptier than ever, but Ms. Woodruff calls occasionally with updates. She praises Dustin for testifying in Greg's hearing. "Your statement is crucial," she says. "It proves he threatened you both." Dustin tries to put the memory of Greg's snarling face behind him, but some nights he's jolted awake, hearing echoes of "I can send you back to the system." He wonders if he'll be haunted forever. The hearing concludes with Greg pleading guilty to several charges, avoiding a protracted trial. He's sentenced to prison time. Patricia, after negotiations, receives probation and mandatory counseling. Kyle remains in foster care. Dustin is relieved that at least the monster is locked away. He can breathe easier. Maybe Kyle can start to heal. One day, Ms. Woodruff visits the group home and pulls Dustin aside. Her eyes twinkle with cautious excitement. A foster couple named the Ramirez family is looking for a boy around your age. They know your story, and they're open to letting you keep in touch with Kyle. I think they might be a good match. Dustin's heart flutters. He agrees to meet them. Luis and Maria Ramirez turn out to be a warm, compassionate couple in their mid-50s. They have a small house with a cozy living room and a backyard garden. Maria works at a local elementary school. Luis is a mechanic with his own shop. They greet Dustin with open smiles. Over a few visits, Dustin grows comfortable. Their approach is nurturing yet laid back, and they express genuine empathy for everything he's been through. Ms. Woodruff arranges a trial placement. Dustin packs his few belongings and moves in. The Ramirez home is modest but inviting. The first few nights, Dustin can't fully relax. He's waiting for a raised voice, a suspicious box of stolen goods. Nothing comes. Instead, Luis invites him to the garage to show him how car engines work, and Maria bakes homemade tortillas. Dustin marvels that these small kindnesses don't come with hidden threats. Slowly, his guard lowers. He calls Kyle from a shared house phone, or they text whenever Kyle's phone is available. Kyle is living with a foster mother who also has 2 toddlers. He confides that it's chaotic, but the woman is kind and not ignoring him. Still, he longs for a stable, permanent home. Dustin can hear the sadness in his voice. He does his best to encourage Kyle, telling him about the Ramirez household. They're good people, he says. They said maybe you can come visit sometime, if that's allowed. Weeks pass and Dustin's life steadies. School is less of a nightmare when he doesn't have to hide bruises or hush secrets. He starts doing better in classes, occasionally meeting Ms. Woodruff, who beams at his progress. She mentions Kyle a few times. Apparently, Kyle has started therapy to cope with the trauma. Dustin quietly wishes Kyle could find a place like the Ramirez home. On a chilly Saturday afternoon, Ms. Woodruff arranges for Kyle to spend a few hours at the Ramirez house. Dustin is ecstatic. He helps Luis rake leaves in the yard, glancing anxiously at the gate. At last, a car pulls up and Kyle emerges, hugging a small backpack. Dustin rushes over, big grin on his face, and Kyle lights up in return. They stand in the yard, awkward at first, then fall into easy conversation. Maria calls from the kitchen window, "I'm making hot chocolate. Come inside, it's freezing out." They do, wiping their feet on the mat. Kyle's gaze roams over the living room, handmade crocheted blankets on the sofa, photos of the Ramirez family. "It's nice," Kyle says quietly. Dustin beams. They're good people. No secrets, no stolen stuff. He pauses, voice softening. "How are you?" Kyle shrugs, eyes flicking to a faint scar on his arm. "Better, I think. Therapy helps. I still get nightmares about him. But at least I'm not walking on eggshells every day." Dustin nods, heart heavy with empathy. "I get nightmares too. Sometimes I wake up thinking he's gonna show up out of nowhere." They sip hot chocolate, Maria fussing over them like a grandmother even though she's just a bit older than their parents might have been. Luis comes in from the garage, dust on his overalls, greets Kyle warmly. Kyle gives timid smiles in return, clearly unused to father figures who don't radiate danger. When the time comes for Kyle to leave, they linger by the front door. Maria speaks softly to Kyle's social worker, a woman named Ms. Campbell, and it seems they discuss the possibility of Kyle returning for more visits. Dustin's chest bursts with hope that maybe, someday, Kyle can move in here too. But he tries not to get attached to that fantasy. He knows the system rarely aligns so neatly. Still, for the next few months, Kyle visits occasionally. Dustin shares video games with him, shows him the little library in the Ramirez living room, teaches him how to help Maria in the kitchen. They talk about everything: the weirdness of middle school, old memories of fleeting good times, their frustration with the foster system. Each visit ends with a hug and a wave, a half-sad smile. They never say it, but they both know how easily their lives can shift again. Dustin's therapy sessions also continue. He tells the counselor about the guilt he feels for exposing Greg, worried he destroyed Kyle's family. The counselor gently reminds him that Greg destroyed the family by abusing them and Dustin saved Kyle. "You can't hold yourself responsible for Greg's choices," she says. Dustin tries to internalize that truth. Around springtime, rumors reach Dustin that Kyle's current foster situation might not be permanent. Ms. Woodruff confirms it. They love him, but they're specialized in caring for much younger kids, and they feel Kyle would benefit from a home more suited to a teenager's needs, she explains. Dustin's pulse jumps. The Ramirez couple has mentioned that if Kyle ever needed a placement, they'd be willing to consider it. Dustin shares this with Ms. Woodruff, who smiles. "I'll talk to them and Kyle's caseworker. It's not guaranteed, but let's see." In the following weeks, Ms. Woodruff orchestrates more official visits for Kyle at the Ramirez household. Luis and Maria remain open and enthusiastic. Kyle is hesitant, still reeling from repeated disappointments, but each visit grows more comfortable. One evening, after dinner, Kyle and Dustin retreat to Dustin's room, playing a board game. Kyle glances around, seeing the tidy bed, posters Dustin's put up, the sense of belonging. "You're lucky," he says softly. "I was worried after everything with Greg that you'd end up in some group home forever." Dustin smiles sadly. "Me too. I guess I got lucky with them. I want the same for you." Kyle's eyes glisten with a mix of gratitude and longing. "Yeah, that'd be nice." He sets down a game piece, glancing at the door. "I still feel weird around father figures. Luis seems so normal and kind, it freaks me out sometimes." Dustin nods. "I get that. But trust me, he's genuine. He never yells, never slams doors. It's just, calm here." Later that night, when Kyle goes home, Dustin confides in Luis and Maria, telling them how much Kyle yearns for stability. They exchange soft looks. "We'll see what we can do," Maria murmurs. "He's a sweet boy." Eventually, after multiple meetings, paperwork, and a final decision from the caseworkers, it happens. Kyle is approved to move in with the Ramirez family. The day arrives under a bright spring sun. Kyle steps out of Ms. Campbell's car, carrying a small duffel bag, brow furrowed with nerves. Dustin bursts from the house, flings his arms around him. Kyle hugs back, trembling with emotion. Maria and Luis greet him warmly, show him to a freshly prepared bedroom adjacent to Dustin's. It's modest but decorated with a new desk, a comfortable bed, and a reading lamp shaped like a soccer ball. "We heard you like soccer," Maria says, smiling. Kyle's face flickers with an expression Dustin recognizes, somewhere between awe and disbelief. That evening, they share a family dinner. Kyle glances warily at Luis a few times, as if expecting a harsh word or a sudden outburst, but none comes. After dinner, they watch a silly movie in the living room, Maria crocheting while Luis cracks jokes about the film's plot holes. Kyle and Dustin sit side by side on the couch. Partway through, Kyle inches closer, leaning his head on Dustin's shoulder. Dustin drapes an arm around him. Neither says anything, but Dustin can feel Kyle's tension gradually melt. For the first time in a long while, they're together without dread hanging overhead. Of course, adjusting isn't simple. Kyle has nightmares. He sometimes apologizes excessively for minor mishaps. He can't stand it if someone looms over him unexpectedly. Dustin patiently reassures him, and so do Luis and Maria, who never raise a hand or a voice in anger. Therapy sessions help. Over time, Kyle begins to trust that if he spills a drink, nobody will hurt him. During one therapy visit, the counselor suggests that Kyle consider writing a letter to Patricia to process unresolved feelings. Kyle discusses it with Dustin. "I'm not sure if I want contact," Kyle admits. "She let Greg do those things. But she's still my mom." Dustin squeezes his friend's hand, tells him to do whatever feels right. Kyle eventually writes a letter, releasing some anger and heartbreak onto the page. Whether Patricia ever reads it or not, it gives Kyle some closure. Months roll on. Summer arrives, bringing warm afternoons in the Ramirez backyard. Dustin and Kyle help Luis fix up an old car, learning about tools and mechanics. Sometimes they play pickup soccer in the yard, Kyle gradually discovering the spark of joy that was snuffed out. Dustin, who's never been big on sports, tries his best to keep up, just happy to see Kyle smile. One day, Ms. Woodruff visits for a routine check-in and observes them in the yard, laughing, sweaty from a short soccer match. She beams. "You two look so happy," she says. "What a change from the day I first saw you guys in the police station." They remember that day with a shudder, but also a sense of relief that it's behind them. Ms. Woodruff remarks on Kyle's blossoming confidence. He still has quiet moments, but the haunted look in his eyes has lessened. Nightmares don't vanish overnight, of course. Kyle still wakes up crying sometimes. Dustin hears him through the wall, sneaks into Kyle's room to pat his back until he calms down. "He can't get you," Dustin whispers, referring to Greg. "He's locked up. You're safe." Kyle nods, tears rolling silently, eventually drifting back to sleep. In those moments, Dustin understands the depth of the bond they've forged. More than friends, they're like brothers in everything but blood. By the time fall arrives, both boys are in stable routines. Dustin is in 7th grade, Kyle in 8th. The Ramirez house bustles with activity. Maria cooking hearty meals, Luis returning from his shop with greased hands and a warm grin, the boys exchanging jokes, occasionally bickering over chores but never anything serious. They celebrate Dustin's 12th birthday with a homemade cake. Kyle shyly gives Dustin a small sketch he's drawn. The two of them standing in a field, soccer ball at their feet, a bright sun overhead. Dustin treasures it more than any store-bought gift. One weekend, they're invited to a small gathering at a local community center for foster parents and kids. Ms. Woodruff is there, along with other social workers. Dustin spots a few kids he remembers from the group home. Kyle clings to Dustin at first, still uneasy in crowds, but Ms. Woodruff coaxes him to meet some peers who share similar stories. Eventually, they all gather for a short recognition ceremony honoring a handful of foster youth who've shown remarkable courage in adversity. To Dustin and Kyle's surprise, Ms. Woodruff calls them up front, presenting each with a certificate. They bravely exposed a dangerous situation and protected each other, she announces. Applause fills the room. Kyle blushes, tears brimming. Dustin's heart swells with pride and a bit of embarrassment. After the event, Ms. Woodruff hugs them both. "I'm so proud of you," she says. "What you did took incredible strength." Kyle rubs the back of his neck, glancing at Dustin. "Couldn't have done it alone," he murmurs. They linger a while, chatting with other families, exchanging stories. Dustin notices how some adults approach Luis and Maria, praising them for taking in two boys from troubled backgrounds. The couple waves it off modestly, as if opening their home is just the natural thing to do. In the months that follow, Dustin and Kyle continue healing. They never forget Greg's anger, the nights of terror, but each day in the Ramirez household cements the idea that not all adults are cruel. Kyle's therapist notes his progress, from flinching at every loud noise to tentatively trusting fatherly affection. Dustin's own nightmares fade somewhat. He invests more energy in school, discovering a love for drawing, perhaps inspired by Kyle. They plan to join an art club together. A year after Greg's arrest, news arrives that he's lost any appeal and will remain in prison. He attempts to contact Kyle via letters, but Kyle decides he doesn't want them. With the help of a counselor, he reads the first one, full of half-baked apologies and self-justifications, then discards it. He tells Dustin afterward, he's just trying to shift blame. "I don't need that." Dustin nods, quietly proud that Kyle is setting boundaries for his own mental health. Sometimes they wonder about Patricia. She's in a different state, reportedly living with relatives, attending mandated counseling. She sent one letter, tear-stained, apologizing. Kyle read it, cried for hours, but didn't write back. Maybe in time, he'll consider reconciling. For now, he's content to move forward. The following spring, Dustin finishes 7th grade. Kyle is about to graduate from 8th. The Ramirez couple arranges a small celebration in the backyard to mark Kyle's completion of middle school. They invite Ms. Woodruff and the new social worker assigned to Kyle's case. They grill burgers, hang balloons, even bake a chocolate cake. Kyle stands awkwardly in the yard as they sing a silly version of "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow." He shrugs, cheeks pink. "You guys are weird," he mutters, but the grin on his face says he loves it. Afterward, Dustin and Kyle lie in the grass, the spring breeze whispering through the fence. "Remember that first time I saw you? You were at the window," Dustin recalls. "I thought you looked, I don't know, kind of sad." Kyle folds his arms behind his head, gazing at the clouds. "I was sad. I was trapped. But then you came. You turned everything upside down, but in a good way." Dustin smiles softly, recalling how far they've come. "You freed me. I was always so scared about losing another home. I never spoke up." He swallows. "I guess we saved each other." Kyle reaches out, bumps Dustin's shoulder gently. "Yeah, we did." They lapse into a comfortable silence, letting the warm sun bathe them in promise. Inside the house, Maria laughs at something Luis says. The scent of grilled onions and barbecue sauce lingers on the wind. Once, such normalcy felt impossible to both boys. Now it's their everyday reality. Months slip by. They settle further into the routine of family life. The Ramirez couple has begun the process of officially fostering Kyle, with potential for eventual guardianship or even adoption down the line. For Dustin, adoption has also come up in quiet talks with them. He's tried not to dream too big, but the notion of a permanent family is no longer just a fantasy. Kyle's uncertain if he wants to be adopted or keep some tenuous connection with Patricia. But the fact that he has options is a gift neither boy takes lightly. One Saturday, Ms. Woodruff visits again, this time just for a friendly check-in. She brings ice cream sundaes and watches Dustin and Kyle chatter about their week at school. "You two have come a long way," she muses. "From that day you texted me those photos, Dustin, to now, it's like night and day." Dustin ducks his head, remembering the pounding fear when he sent that text. "I still can't believe I did it," he admits. "Greg had me so scared, but I guess I was more scared of letting Kyle suffer." Kyle reaches over, squeezes Dustin's shoulder. Ms. Woodruff smiles. "That's what real bravery is, you know. Doing what's right even when you're terrified." In the quiet evenings, Dustin sometimes pulls out his old phone, scrolling through pictures. He's deleted most of the evidence from the garage but kept a single photo of the locked storage door, his reminder of how secrets fester behind closed doors. He shuts off the phone, breathing in relief that he doesn't have to hide like that anymore. Across the hallway, Kyle might be reading or sketching, free to express himself without fear of punishment. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves swirl around the yard, Kyle and Dustin sit on the porch steps. Kyle bites his lip, glancing at the horizon. "I got a letter from my mom again," he says softly. "She's in therapy. She wants me to visit." Dustin waits, letting the moment breathe. Kyle sighs. "I don't know if I'm ready. Part of me hates her for not protecting me, for letting him, you know. But she's still my mom." Dustin sets a hand on Kyle's back. "You don't owe her anything. It's your choice. But if you decide to see her, I'll go with you if that helps." Kyle's eyes well with gratitude. "Thanks." He inhales, pulling the autumn air into his lungs. "We'll see. Right now, I'm happy here. With you guys." They watch a gust of wind scatter leaves across the lawn. For a moment, they're just two normal brothers, contemplating everyday problems. Dustin thinks how close they came to a darker path. If they'd never confronted Greg, if they'd let fear silence them. He's proud they found the courage to break free. Life continues in that gentle upward trajectory. Dustin works on an art project. Kyle tries out for the junior soccer team at his high school. They share chores around the Ramirez house, bickering over who has to wash dishes or mow the lawn, but always reconciling with a grin. On weekends, they walk to the corner store for candy, ride bikes around the block, or attempt to help Maria with gardening, though they're not very good at it. Occasionally, nightmares resurface or flashbacks strike when a door slams too hard. But each time, one or the other is there to remind them they're safe. They talk openly, sometimes shedding tears in each other's arms, sometimes venting frustration to Ms. Woodruff or the counselor. Gradually, the nightmares lose their potency. Almost 2 years to the day after Dustin arrived at the McAllisters, the Ramirez family plans a small celebration. Dustin's 13th birthday combined with Kyle's belated 14th. They pick a weekend in late spring, string lights in the backyard, invite Ms. Woodruff, Ms. Campbell, and even a few kids from school. The highlight is a homemade banner that reads, "Happy Birthday, Dustin and Kyle, our brave boys." Dustin laughs at how sappy it is, but tears prick his eyes all the same. During the party, Ms. Woodruff makes a short speech, praising their resilience. Kyle blushes. Dustin rubs the back of his neck, both not used to public accolades. Luis flips burgers. Maria serves fruit punch in plastic cups. The yard fills with laughter. Under the twinkle of lights, Kyle nudges Dustin. "Remember that first day we met? I was suspicious of you, thought you might be trouble." Dustin snorts. "I was trouble. Or so the system said." He grins, sipping punch. "But look at us now. Guess we showed them we can be a real family too." Kyle's expression softens. "I really do see you as my brother." Dustin's chest warms. "Same. We stuck together through everything." They stand side by side, gazing around at the little backyard that's become their sanctuary. Ms. Woodruff waves at them from the snack table. The memory of police sirens, Greg's furious grip, the hush of that lonely hallway at midnight, it all feels distant. They know the trauma won't vanish, but it no longer defines them. As the evening winds down, Dustin and Kyle sneak away to the side of the house, watching fireflies blink in the bushes. Kyle breathes in the mild air. "Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if you hadn't told Ms. Woodruff," he murmurs. "Maybe I'd still be stuck, or maybe Greg would have hurt me worse." Dustin shudders at the thought. "I couldn't let that happen. You deserved better." Kyle glances at him, a ghost of a smile. "You deserved better too. I'm glad we both found it." Eventually, they rejoin the gathering. Luis and Maria start ushering guests out the front door, exchanging hugs and goodbyes. Ms. Woodruff lingers a moment, hugging Dustin and Kyle together. "I'll always be here if you need me," she says, voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so proud of how far you've come. You're not just survivors, you're thriving." They smile, hearts full as she leaves. The house feels comforting, warm from the lingering presence of friends. Dustin and Kyle collapse on the couch, side by side, letting the hum of the dishwasher fill the quiet. Maria appears, ruffling their hair. "It's late," she teases. "You'll need your rest. Boys your age need at least 8 hours of sleep." Kyle stifles a chuckle. "Yes, Mom," he says, sounding slightly shy but genuine. Dustin echoes it. "Yes, Mom," glancing at her with quiet gratitude. The affectionate term slips from their tongues naturally now, a testament to how far they've come. In their separate bedrooms, they settle for the night. Dustin stares at the faint glow of the street lamp through his curtains. His mind drifts to that first day, stepping onto the McAllisters' porch, uncertain if this new home would be salvation or another disappointment. He thinks of Kyle's bruises, the fear etched in his eyes. The memory still hurts, but it's woven into a larger tapestry now, one that includes courage, rescue, and a shared bond that overcame a monstrous presence. He closes his eyes, letting the day's warmth lull him. From across the hallway, he hears Kyle rustle in bed. But there's no tension, no crying, just the gentle sounds of someone drifting into peaceful sleep. Dustin allows himself a small, contented smile. However the future unfolds, they'll face it together, bound by a truth that no fear or system failure could sever. Sometimes the bravest act is simply refusing to stay silent, even when you're only 11 and think no one will believe you. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.